So, that's why an MCP server is a great thing if you're doing like this low-hanging fruit use case of wrapping an API.
Yeah.
Is that you can work with the latest version of the API. You can put in stuff that says, okay, I'm working with version 5.0, and so the tool set knows like what it's working with and everything, and the model doesn't have to figure it out. You can, you can do some of the lifting there.
I think it's a great way to put it. So instead of depending on the unpredictable nature of the model, you can be more instructional on what the model should do or can leverage, and restrict the scope of what the model should rely on to get certain things done.
If you're Google, you want to put 50,000 instances of a server behind a load balancer so that millions of people can hit that one point and
Yeah.
their query can go to any server and any server can answer that query. Right now, that's not possible. That's one of the things that we're working on. The protocol is evolving. A lot of people try to reduce the number of tools by making kind of meta tools that sort of like you call the meta tool and you tell it what sub operation you want to use and everything like that. But I don't see that as being very effective because all of the input schemas and output schemas that are valid for those they all have to be in there. So I don't think that you're really reducing the impact on context. I think you're just making it more complex.
How did you discover MCP? Why did you fall in love with MCP as a protocol itself? And
Yeah.
how come the whole contribution to MCP Inspector came about, and the journey of the MCP Inspector itself? Because I think MCP Inspector has been a great example of a model MCP client, if I can call it that way. And what does the future hold, and any insights and suggestions that you may have for MCP builders or developers building MCP servers. And so this is what I had in mind. But if you think there is another topic.
No, absolutely. And one thing to know about me is I'm, as Steve Martin said, I'm a rambling guy. I I will go down a rabbit hole. So feel free to feel free to direct me in another direction
Yeah,
if I am going too far down a
yeah,
path. But
yeah.
yeah, all of that sounds like good stuff to talk about. I guess to my journey and how I hooked up with MCP. I mean, I've been a developer for many years, and this is just AI was just the latest shiny object. Before that, it was crypto. I'm so glad to be out of that. Did some time working on apps using the OpenAI SDK and so forth, kind of proprietary, talking to their thing with their SDK and everything. And, stuff's good, but you sort of, wait for them to, get fixes in and you wonder why things stop working or, or whatever. That was kind of like where I started with AI. I saw the MCP thing. I don't remember where, how it came onto my radar, but was just one of those things that just clicked immediately that oh, this is important. Yeah, I see a lot of people out there going, why? I mean, I could just talk to APIs. I don't need this fancy wrapper for APIs.
Yeah, I think one of the hot takes is, hey, MCP is just an API wrapper. What's so special about it? Why do you need to care about it? Why can't my agent just make API calls? So
Yeah, exactly. Or why can't I just, roll my own little thing to, be the interface and everything
yeah,
like that, But, it was clear to me that a single adapter of sorts that could take any model and allow it to interact with the world. We expose the world through APIs and SDKs and, in many ways. But everyone doesn't have to roll their own, or you don't have to rely on the model's understanding of a particular API. Depending upon the technology that you're choosing, if you try to get an LLM to work with an API, I was working on a kind of weird niche-y sort of application a little while back with that was using Scalekit and Electron and some various components in there that were just like oil and water. They just didn't work together. And
Yeah.
getting the right versions of each of them to work together was just so hard. And what I discovered while doing that was that using Gemini and other models to try to give me insight into how to make the pieces fit. So I sort of inherited this this architecture. I was going to try to make something work for someone. 75% of the way there. It really became obvious that it was trained on that there was a lot of documentation on like a 5.0-ish version of a certain thing. There was a lot of blog posts and documentation out there for it to consume and work with, but like later versions, not so much. And earlier versions. So it's sort of like if you're working with that, that's great, but I've got this other piece over here that just won't work with that version, right? So I need to go to another version, and now the model is just not quite so up to date on how to do that. And so, that's why an MCP server is a great thing if you're doing like this low-hanging fruit use case of wrapping an API. Is that you can work with the latest version of the API. You can put in stuff that says, okay, I'm working with version 5.0. And so the tool set knows like what it's working with and everything. And the model doesn't have to figure it out. You can do some of the lifting there.
I think it's a great way to put it. So instead of depending on the unpredictable nature of the model, you can be more instructional on what the model should do or can leverage, and restrict the scope of what the model should rely on to get certain things done.
And a lot of developers right now are using one of the hot MCP servers is Context 7. Remember, which is a beautiful kind of an approach to, okay, I'm using this library and I'm using this version of the library, so it's putting the right docs into context. That's a good answer for it. And yet another, here's MCP to the rescue in terms of being able to just plug that in, and the model is able to work with that and the other MCP servers on your project and so forth.
Yeah. So, Cliff, before Anthropic came up with the proposal for the MCP as a spec, OpenAI already had function calling. And the tool calling itself is not so unknown for developers building agents. So why do you think we needed MCP in the first place?
I believe that, one of the things that kind of happened is that everyone sort of adopted the OpenAI SDK as a way of just put in the endpoint to my model, and that'll be fine, because a model is a model is a model. For the most part, nobody's coming up with crazy new like knobs for models, and so that was very nice. But the thing is that OpenAI controls that SDK. What goes in it, when it gets, big chunks get deprecated and whole new, takes are rolled out and everything like that. And, you just basically have to go with them, and that's good. That's just fine. But the nice thing about Anthropic doing this, obviously in those days when they, two guys in a room came up with this, Justin and David, I don't know the thinking process that was going on there, but I'm pretty sure it was sort of like, well, we need this too. We need the tool calling and so forth like that. But what are some other things that we could do? And, they thought about prompts and resources and sampling and so forth like that. And came up with a nice little subset of things that would be useful. It was just a nice little thing. But the thing that is going to make MCP eat the world, and seems to already be doing that, is that they chose to open source it. And then they got serious about it being a truly open source project. It's not just, hey, the source is out there, you guys do what you want, but we're over here and we're really controlling what is going into it. We're actually doing the coding on it, and you get to, it's not halfway open source. It's fully open source, and they've gone really stepped up in terms of putting a governance model in place, bringing in maintainers and so forth. There are maintainers from all over the industry. I mean, and me, I'm just I'm a little developer out here in the backwaters of Tennessee. I'm a consultant. I've been around for a while, but I'm not at the echelons of Google and GitHub and stuff like that. I mean, those guys are on the core maintainer team. Don't get me wrong. I mean, the hand on the steering wheel is a pretty steady hand, and it's informed by people from OpenAI itself. The fact that there's an OpenAI is in the room is just a huge bellwether that they've put it onto their model, onto ChatGPT and so forth like that, is saying that yes, that's a huge endorsement. And of course, for OpenAI, anything that helps people push more tokens at their model, they're 100% behind. They don't make money from owning an SDK. No, all they have is a sinkhole into which to put development time, right? So why not open source it, but make sure that it evolves in a way that makes sense and that will allow large scale enterprise deployments to be in our future. It's like right now we're running a few, servers on our desktop, maybe in our, IDEs and things like that. People are figuring out how to do some, deployed remote servers and everything. But, if you're Google, you want to put 50,000 instances of a server behind a load balancer so that millions of people can hit that one point and their query can go to any server and any server can answer that query. Right now, that's not possible. But that's one of the things that we're working on. The protocol is evolving. One of the big kind of pushes in the transports working group. In our Discord, we got lots of working groups for different things. And in the transports working group, one thing that I'm very excited about, and that in a year's time, I think it will be a very different looking protocol in terms of this aspect, that dream of massive deployment by big companies now. And when Google is able to do that, MCP will be like the air we breathe. It will be, no longer this little thing that somebody might come out with something else. It's a big challenger. I don't think anything's going to knock it off of that track in the near future. I think it's well on track to be that standard piece of infrastructure. But one of the things, back to how we get there, is making improvements, looking at what we originally came up with and realizing, no, that's not quite right. That wasn't exactly right. And one of the things is transport and state. When you use streamable HTTP, you connect, you have a session ID that is tied to that transport, right? Okay. And so that's the statefulness is tied to the transport. So if you stand up a remote server, 1 million people are going to hit that server.
Yeah.
Not a load balancer.
How do you
No.
make it
It's that
stateless?
server.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And so right now, it's stateful by default. I
Yeah.
mean, you can send queries without a session ID and act stateless, but you still have to do the initialization handshake, which is pointless if it's stateless, because the next question, if it really were stateless, it's like, here's a query. Oh, who are you? Let me answer the question. So
Yeah.
what we have to do is we have to divorce the statefulness in the session from the
Yeah.
transport, push it up into the data layer. And
Yeah.
if it becomes a data layer, concern, then we connect. We don't care how we connect, right? We send in a connection. We say, here's my session ID, and that load balancer goes, oh, okay, here's a server that's not doing much right now, and that server answers you, gets your session ID, hits your Redis or whatever you're storing your session information in, and pulls that up and answers your query. So if you've got a long running query, and you've had a disconnect and there have been a number of events since you were last there, and it needs to replay those to you, you send a last event ID, and it goes, oh, okay, well, here's what's happened since. Then, any one of those servers can do that, right? So this is, that's quite a bit different from the way the protocol looks right now. But I think most anyone who looks at this for more than 5 minutes can realize that has to happen. It just has to happen, right? And that goes back to the whole thing of the core maintainers, who include people like Google and Anthropic and OpenAI, and all the players are there who see the North Star, who see where we're going with MCP. And so, although the protocol evolves at a slow rate, we're looking at another version of the protocol, possibly a little bit later this year, and kind of trying to collect all the things that will be in it and see what needs to be done to get us there and everything like that. But it won't include this. It will include some improvements towards statelessness and things like that, but baby steps, because it's the turtle carrying the world on its back. And so but it's wonderful. It's wonderful to be involved in such a project, really.
Yeah. So you spoke about three things, Cliff. I think those are brilliant. One is, first of all, the adoption and embracement from OpenAI and Google and everyone else actually shows the power of this protocol in standardizing the tool calling as an infrastructure for all the agents and the connective tissue between agents and the models. Number two is Anthropic actually following and embracing the real essence of open source nature, of creating a community around it and making sure that there is an independent governance model in accepting proposals from everyone, reviewing proposals, improving the spec itself, one proposal by one proposal. And the thing that you pointed out, of course, it's not perfect today, and the whole idea is, how do you improve it and how do you make it better with contributions from everyone who is involved, so that it can be even more valuable to the overall community. I think those three things, you're absolutely right and spot on that aspect. And Cliff, you have been contributing to the MCP inspector among many others. I wanted to hear from you on what is the most important role, or what is the objective of the MCP inspector as a tool from your vantage point?
When I started with the MCP stuff, it became really obvious because of my choices. I started pretty early. I think it had been around for like 3 or 4 months or something like that. Kudos to all at Anthropic for getting the protocol and SDK and inspector a server repo with some reference servers and so forth out the door in that time. But it was still a very proto experience. I mean, in terms of the spec and everything adhering to the spec. When I got started with it, I wanted to do some things that weren't supported in the inspector. There's the everything server, for developers who, for any developer who wants to start working with MCP, particularly if you're a TypeScript developer, as I am. The two tools that you need to immediately seek out and get cloned locally and get familiar with are the servers repo, and in particular the everything server, which is sort of meant to be everything in the kitchen sink, let's demonstrate everything. Let's try to, at least, right? You bring up the everything server, you connect to it with the inspector, you run its tools, you ask for its resources, you ask for its prompts, you do some things to, you see, open up your browser console, you look at what's going back and forth, you look at the inspector has a proxy. Like there's, so it connects to your server via a proxy. More on that later. I've just added a feature that lets you do direct connect to servers. It's a little opaque sometimes. The communications going from the inspector via a transport to the proxy, and then the proxy going through another transport to the server, and the server responding, and the headers, getting the headers and the responses reliably back and forth, sometimes introduces a kind of an opaque nature to the troubleshooting process. Enough so that on enough issues that I was fielding, I just kept time and time again saying, I just wish I could get rid of the proxy altogether. I mean, you have to have it for a standard I/O server. Because the proxy starts the standard I/O server in a process on your machine. There's no other way to talk to such a server unless you run it in a standalone proxy. You use MCP proxy if you want or whatever, which is actually, a viable thing. But all you really have to do, the only reason that you couldn't connect directly to a streamable or SSE server is CORS. You just basically have to say allow all origins and allow the headers, MCP protocol version, and session ID and last event ID and things like that. You need to let the client be able to see those headers. Just very simple configuration. And now your inspector client can connect directly to the server. And that means that in your browser's window, in the inspector window of the browser, you can actually see the real back and forth to the server and know that the proxy isn't dropping the ball anywhere. So on the next version of the inspector, you'll see a little drop down underneath the URL that lets you say direct or via proxy. And it won't work if you go direct unless you've added this CORS stuff. And so I've got to do a little bit of educational outreach and documentation and so forth around that. But getting that feature out was kind of exciting and made me very happy. But when I got started with the whole MCP thing, I realized the inspector and the everything server, those are the important things, because you're building a server. However you choose to organize your code, you don't have to build it. The everything server is kind of cobbled together, and it's a result of a whole bunch of people adding things to it. So it could use a refactor, I'll say. But in terms of just demonstrating all the stuff, so that you can see, okay, it sends this message, I respond with this message, okay, I use this SDK method, okay. So it illuminates how to do things. When I first got there, one of the first things that I did, I saw when I started with MCP, just working with it, was that everyone in the world was going to try to wrap APIs with it. So going out and spending effort, going, what API would I like to wrap? And let me go pour my efforts into that. Just wasn't very attractive to me. But I was working with Goose blocks, Goose CLI agent. And I built the first MCP was they had just done an interview with someone from their community who had done a little demo where they were able to get several Goose agents to collaborate by giving them each a set of instructions that was kind of like a protocol for them. That was like, you know, when you connect, check this tool, or when you connect, somehow they were able to. Oh yeah, he was using a database, I believe, that let him store like messages and IDs and things like that. So anyway, at the end of the thing, you know, it was just to allow, you know, like if you connect and there's no other agents connected, then make yourself be the coordinator. And then as other agents connect, give them tasks if there's, you know, a request from, you know, and so forth like that. And try to break down tasks, assign them and stuff like that. So they were able to get a little bit of rudimentary collaboration going there. And at the end, the person had said, hey, I wish I could remember his name right now, but he said, you know, maybe someone will make this into an MCP server. And I was like, oh, hey. That's something I could do, you know, because I was, you know, interested in MCP and, you know, thinking about something. So that led me down the path of, I'm not wrapping an API. I'm really kind of exposing some tools that will allow agents to collaborate. And so I built this Goose Team server, and it gave, you know, all the stuff, messaging and task management and, you know, ID assignment for agents and stuff. And it worked to a point. I even kind of got the protocol expressed as a mermaid diagram that they could follow, you know, and so forth. They're all following the same rules. And, you know, I was hoping for local models to be able to do stuff. And, you know, it broke down to how well any model could follow the rules and stay in a loop. Like if you don't have anything, sleep for 2 seconds and then go check them again. You know, I gave it a tool to sleep for 2 seconds. So it worked a bit, but it could chew up a bunch of tokens and it could turn into a Three Stooges situation in a little no time. So I realized that you needed coordination. A little bit more so than just collaboration. You needed something that was able, if you want to attempt anything large, like, hey, I'm going to write an enterprise scale application, you know, with n-tiered, you know, architecture and so forth. I started another one called Puzzlebox because I realized that, like, the thing that we do in enterprise development is that we approach a project in phases. And, you know, we'll do some thinking about what our North Star might be before we come up with our requirements. And, you know, we'll nail down our domain glossary and things like that, you know, before we move on to doing design and then on to code and all of this stuff. So I just sort of thought, you know, because why not use a state machine? Well, you know, so I made a little MCP server that could host dynamic state machines. You define a state machine, it could be the phases of your project and your agents. Basically, then what you really want, back to the whole thing of with Goose, with the different agents all having the same protocol to follow. You know, they're all clones of each other, basically. Even if they're different models, they're still following the same rules. Like, you know, back to the enterprise, we have teams. At each phase, we have teams of people with very specific roles and strengths and so forth and skills. So I imagined each phase having a team, each team having members that have roles. They do the work that is the job of that phase, and there are some tasks associated with that and everything. And that's going to generate some kind of, like, you're in requirements phase maybe, or you're in the North Star, you're in inception phase, and it's just like a North Star document. That's going to come out of it. And that could become a resource that the next phase could read. And now their job is to create a domain glossary and a requirements document, a functional requirements document, right? So then they generate those documents, which become resources, and then on to a design phase and so forth. The thing that they're stepping through is a deterministic thing. You know, we don't need to leave the phases to an LLM.
We calculated it, yeah.
Right. So you got these teams who are sitting there and they're waiting for their, you know, a signal that they're ready to go, right? So the design people don't start working until the requirements are done. that led me to, okay, the state machine is a dynamic construct in the memory of the MCP server. And all the agents, irrespective of the phase they're in, need to subscribe to that. So when that changes, when the requirements documents are generated in the domain glossary and we're like, okay, we're out of that phase now. Well, are we? Well, also I want to, I want to, have a guard that will say, okay, are we done? Do these documents reflect the North Star that we said, and are they internally consistent and so forth? So that may go out to a human in the loop via elicitation, which we didn't even have at the time, or to sampling. So we've got a prompt that takes those resources and sends it to an LLM that says, are we good to move to the next phase, right? And if so, then okay, a state transition takes place. We're in the next phase. And then all those subscribed agents get a message, hey, the state machine changed. And so they are able then to go, oh, okay, it's time for me to begin working. I'll go get this resource and that resource, and I'll start my work. When I got to it, only 3 or 4 months into it, into MCP itself, I mean, the subscribable resources were there as and dynamic subscribable resources, which I feel like says a lot about how deeply they were thinking about. It's not just tool calling, right? And sampling and all that stuff was there, but the inspector support for it and the everything server support for it, not there. So I'm I'm looking into the SDK. I'm looking at what do I have to do to make this happen, because I am on my own at this point.
Yeah.
And then I realized, well, this is an open source project. I made a well-formed PR to the inspector, adding all of the stuff for subscribable resources for subscribing, and to the everything server to add support for sending the notifications and everything, so that I could see that like what I think should happen works. I had to build that in this sandbox that they give us anyway and see that it works, And then, of course, when I pointed at my thing, it was like, oh, wow, it works. Awesome. Right. So, I just sort of naturally continued to contribute because I'm on this thing. I'm interested in the MCP thing. I'm doing it regardless. And the tools that are necessary to make sure that what I'm working on are also in my IDE, ready to be fixed at any moment if I run into stub my toe on something or something's missing, right? So I just naturally continue to contribute to that just as well. And eventually I got invited to come and join the maintainers team, and so I've been working almost full-time on that ever since. And my thing has moved slightly to the background because I'm also writing a client. All of this management of the phases and the roles and all of that stuff requires a custom MCP host and all of that stuff. So that's coming along and everything. But this is far more interesting to me, the actual MCP and all of its bits and bobs, seeing it move ahead and seeing the things that are wrong with it, accepting that all things must change and that I can be an agent of that change, and as well as everyone else. A huge part of the time that I'm spending is really seeing people coming in saying, oh, hey, this thing. Just like what I was doing. Oh, hey, we really need this, or this is broken, and I think this is the problem. And so it's awesome to be able to just approve and help people do that. And so now I am in the same position in terms of looking for good maintainers, good potential maintainers, because we do want to bring on people to help us maintain the inspector and the repos and the SDKs and all of that. I mean, it's a very big project. There's if you want to change how the spec works, I mean, just how the spec itself works, that's a whole different ball of wax. There's, in terms of how should like we were talking earlier about moving sessions and statefulness out of the transports. That's a much higher level concern that has to. We can't just make it happen with a PR to the TypeScript SDK. Right, we can't do that because we need to. Already, all the SDKs they're trying to support the same spec, but they're also little laboratories. There are different things happening in each one of them, and so your experience as a developer with the Python SDK might be quite different from the TypeScript SDK, for instance. They're both following and shooting to support the same spec, but in the TypeScript SDK, someone thought, oh, well, maybe what they call a server in the TypeScript SDK is called a session over in the Python SDK. I think that's actually the better name. Think about what a server in the TypeScript SDK. It's not, you write an express server that uses the server thing in the SDK, right? So it's very it's a bit of a misnomer there. But they over there in the Python SDK, they've said, hey, what about being able to manage multiple connections? So you've got session groups and so forth. There's nothing in the spec about that. Right? And so there's nothing really to say, no, you can't do that. That's not in the spec. That's just an extra affordance you have in Python that we don't currently have in the TypeScript SDK. And at some point, I'm certain that someone's going to come along and provide us with a PR to the TypeScript SDK saying, hey, what if we had that too? Right? And if the meme spreads, then it's the strength of it, right? That's how it works. It's a little chaotic. The differences between the
SDKs
not just the parity in terms of their relative support of the spec entirely. I mean, they're all moving toward full parity, but these little bits and bobs and differences and names and features and stuff like that.
In that context, Cliff, do you see MCP Inspector as one of the principal examples of being as close to the spec as possible, if not the first, implementation of the spec intentions?
We certainly try. When a new spec is formed, and the SDKs, usually the Python and TypeScript SDKs are the first to reach a full implementation and so forth like that. And so in a way, we're kind of gated by the TypeScript SDK in terms of our ability to, without rolling our own implementation of stuff in the inspector outside of the SDK, which is not really the right way to do things. We put pressure on the SDK a lot. I mean, I do a lot of contributions to the SDK when I find that something that we need in the inspector sort of requires SDK changes. There's a thing, and developers may see this, and this is actually kind of a good opportunity maybe to mention this. There was a laxness in our interpretation at the inspector of the support for the logging capability. And this existed in our examples in the TypeScript SDK and Kotlin and all the other ones, that they would just say logging, right? And if they sent a log message, they say, oh, we support logging capability. But if you look at the spec, it says that, if you send messages, you must say that, support this logging capability. But it also says a client may send a logging/set level request.
Yeah.
So we added a feature. We didn't have this problem before. Servers, we just connect to them, good to go, no problem, because we're not really paying any attention to that. Logs would come and we would display them and that would be fine. We would set a listener regardless for log messages coming from the client. Or from the server. But upon At some point we decided, okay, levels. The spec talks about levels, and that you should support even the RFC for the levels that we should support and everything like that. So we thought, okay, let's add a drop down to the inspector. Because we're sending out in our everything server to show how log messages work, right? We have a little thing that just sits there and spits out log messages at random levels on a regular basis. So you see your little log messages window, like boop, boop. And here's an info, here's a critical, so it seemed like, okay, well, let's put a drop down in there that lets us choose what the debug level or what the log level is, and we'll just default to debug, right? But we're not 100% sure that we're in sync with the server on what the level is, right? We're just assuming it's debug at the beginning, and then you change it and we'll send the set level request. But like logically, that's the sort of thing that you want to handshake on, right? And so, following the spec, which says that the client may send this request, we went ahead and did. And so that caused a whole lot of servers to just stop working. Like you could not connect to them, and it would give an error that was just like, what? So of course, the issues, people, complaining that, hey, there's a problem here. We're faced with, well, do we stop sending that message so that servers will start connecting again? That didn't seem right, because the inspector is a tool for debugging whether your server is built right.
Yeah.
And
so
if you're...
Because you're talking about that, where do you think the MCP inspector plays a role in a developer who is building the MCP server? Because you're saying that, hey, it is the foremost arsenal that a developer has to ensure that they're building the right kind of MCP server. So is all the decisions that you're taking also revolving around the same principle?
Yeah. We're, on that one, we fall toward... Yes, it's better to let these servers start to fail. Even if it appears to be a regression in the inspector, it really is that we've just begun interpreting the spec in a more strict way. Yeah. And we're sending the message that under spec we're allowed to send, and that you can then therefore expect in the field for other clients to send.
Correct.
Any client that is going to... VS Code or anything, that is going to connect to your server and go, okay, you support logging. Maybe they've given an affordance. Maybe there's a flag or a switch or whatever like that. And so you got to expect that this is going to come at you, and you don't want it failing in the field. It's much better to have the inspector tool failing and causing you to scratch your head for an hour or two trying to figure it out, right? So once we began realizing, okay, the failure mode here is terrible, right? The path forward was to put up a toast that explains, okay, you're claiming to have support for the logging capability, but you don't have a listener. That was the failure, is that we send the thing and you haven't gone to the trouble to set up a listener for the set level request. Yeah. And so therefore you get a method not found. Right? Method not found. Like what? So people were a little bit confused about that, right? We had added support for log level handling listener. And so forth. So we'd added the listener. We'd added logic to determine, okay, is this message that's going out, should we ignore it, right? Or should we send it? It was a bit of code, and it felt very onerous to have developers all have to duplicate that code or implement that code in whatever SDK and in their servers that we have, because that's boilerplate. It's pure boilerplate. There's no reason for anybody, because it's always going to be the same. This is an instance where the SDK, I came around to the SDK with a PR that added automatic log level support. So if you create a server using the server class or the MCP server class, and you state that logging as a capability, it will automatically add this listener. It automatically has log level handling in it. The only thing you have to do as a developer is not send like a full, construct a full log message and send it using the notification method that you send all other notifications with. You use what was already existing on server and that we've mirrored to MCP server, the send logging message method. And you just put in the parameters. What was the level? What was the data? And it will create the right message and send it if it's not ignored based upon the level that has been requested by the client.
Makes sense.
And that works for a server that has multiple. So you can have on a streamable HTTP server with multiple clients connected. Each client can request their own level, and it will be respected. That's nice, and I just kind of want people to understand that little thing and go look at their servers and look at that send logging level message and realize, like, just do that for your logging, and you're going to be good to go if you're using TypeScript. And now there's like, I have to now begin this campaign with the other SDKs to say, hey, because I got a thing, someone saying, hey, I'm running this, Kotlin demo and it's, having a problem, right? Kotlin needs to implement that as well. So I'm pointing all of the other SDK developers to this little bit of code and saying, hey, you need to do this, So you never know when you're going to end up in a little, like your own little campaign to make things happen inside of this ecosystem. But, you do it when you have to, when it seems that it's the right thing to do.
Right thing to do. Yeah. So Cliff, when it comes to developers who are getting into building MCP servers, what are some of the foundational advice would you give them? Like, where should they go look at patterns of building the right way of doing the right MCP server? How do they troubleshoot? How do they make it better? How do they iterate? How do they evaluate the quality of the MCP servers? And how does MCP Inspector help them get to building a high quality MCP server? So what is your advice for the developers?
There are patterns out there. I mean, you can look at. Fortunately, in our servers repo, we have a few servers there in Python and TypeScript, and you can look at how some of those are built. But it's not prescriptive about, this is how you should build it. I'm doing an enterprise consulting engagement right now, and I'm building a server in a different way than I've built them ever before, just because of the way the requirements are and the way that I need for it to be built. So I would say, find a pattern, the Git server, or, on our servers page, not only do we have our reference servers, but we have a gazillion community and official servers. I mean, like, it's hard to get to the actual functional contributions in that repo because there are like hundreds of PRs that like add my server to the README. But you can go follow those and see a lot of great examples in the wild.
What are your favorite MCP servers out of all those hundreds of thousands of MCP servers out there?
I like the GitHub server. They're dealing with a problem of the tool space is very large. We don't have an in protocol way of managing that, right? But what we've seen in the wild is that enterprises building on great big APIs, can very easily overwhelm the context of an LLM with descriptions and input, the name, the description, the input schema, the output schema, all of this for a bunch of tools. I mean, like Azure has over 25,000 endpoints to cover, and same with Microsoft Office and things like that. And so GitHub is one of those as well. We had originally had a GitHub server, and that's actually we have an archived GitHub server in the TypeScript repo. There's a link to the archived we have an archived version of the repo that has that server. I should say, I have the GitHub server that I used as a model for the first ones that I began working on, which were real nice, putting all the tools in one place and everything and having a simple server. Definitely don't follow the model of the everything server where everything is in one big file. It's terrible. Also, the everything server uses the server class, which is a little bit lower level than MCP server, which makes it is a little bit higher level and makes it easier to define your classes and stuff like that, or your tools and all of that. But the GitHub server is our little old archived one is a great way to, like, when I first came to it, I looked at it and it all made sense to me. It was just very nice, clean separation of the things, and I could understand very easily how to go off, and I used it as a model for my first servers to build on in TypeScript. Of course, there's a lot of Python users out there. You'll find, examples yourself. Just suffice it to say that I'm a TypeScript guy. If you look at any language, it doesn't really matter, just how to separate things. I think you could look at, for instance, that GitHub server in TypeScript, and you could say, okay, well, I could put my things in this structure and it would grow well, right? And when GitHub went and they built their own server, we supported a small handful of, operations, but they've got, okay, here's everything. And now, how do you deal with that? We'll start up the server and say, these are the tool sets that I want to start with, So, I would say start small. Most servers are, 4 or 5 tools tops. I mean, most actual servers in the wild are. These use cases of, the enterprise with massive APIs are really kind of in their own class. If you're a person in enterprise looking at that problem, you're going to approach it a whole lot differently. There are people who are, sometimes will split your tool sets across, have them all available, but have them at different endpoints. Lots of takes on how to make that happen. A lot of people try to reduce the number of tools by making kind of meta tools that sort of you call the meta tool and you tell it what sub operation you want to use and everything like that. But I don't see that as being very effective, because all of the input schemas and output schemas that are valid for those they all have to be in there. So I don't think that you're really reducing the impact on context. I think you're just making it more complex. Really, right. It might seem like, oh, I've got less tools, job done, but I don't.
It's not an atomic tool. It's not an atomic tool. Basically, you're combining 5 different functionalities into one tool and then saying that you reduce the context window.
Yeah, I mean, if you still have to have all the input and output schemas that are valid for all of those tools. I mean, now it may be that you have several tools that have the same input and output schemas. In which case, you might achieve a savings by putting those all into one meta tool and having a extra field that says which, right there, if you can see that, go for it. Yes, absolutely. So, there's no absolutely, this is the rule to follow. Everything is really based on your situation and what you're trying to do. So, what I suggest really is going out and looking at the implementations of a lot of servers and forming your own opinions, rather than trying to go, oh, okay, here's the model to follow. There's a grail out there. There's not. There's just a lot of people trying to build things that work optimally and that models are good with. And in the end, the proof's in the pudding. I mean, you got to put some evals on it somehow. You got to get an idea of how well the models actually use this thing that you've produced. It doesn't matter how nicely it's structured and how like many tools that you've managed to get it down to and everything if the models can't figure out what to do with it, right? So there's that aspect. And that's one thing that maybe bears a little bit of talk about the inspector and so forth, which is, there's another inspector out there you may have heard of, MCP Jam. That's a great project. They forked our repo to begin with and kind of went off and made their own thing with it. And their direction was to let you connect LLMs to it and so forth and to do evals and things like that. Sort of the line that we have with the inspector, like why, if you've got this thing that's so much better, then why even pay attention to, this old, time-worn inspector that doesn't have all of those features. Well, we are interested in deterministic testing of your features. Right? If you connect an LLM, if you let this thing connect to an LLM and then, use your server through it, and then you're introducing, non-deterministic behavior, right? So then what happens is, first of all, our issues pile up with people going, oh, it doesn't work, and you're like, okay, wait a second, all right, what model did you use? Let me see if I can, right? So it's, we have a hard line there in that we're interested in just deterministic functional testing of your server. That's, I believe, a thing of great value. The next level of being able to test it against LLMs and so forth, maybe MCP Jam is a good place to go for that. There are lots of other, just put it in your IDE and connect it to Claude Code or whatever and just see how it works, right? But that's kind of it. So when the PRs come in that want to, take us that direction, those won't go very far. We had a guy who made a PR that basically added a whole evals framework to the inspector one time, a massive PR, beautiful thing, but that wasn't really something that we were ready to take on the maintenance burden of and everything. And so, I hated to say, no, but, the team, we just decided as a whole that wasn't really something we wanted to maintain, regardless of how wonderful it was. But then I hit the guy up and I said, hey, why don't you excise that from, the inspector and turn it into its own thing because it's got a lot of value. And so he did. And a few weeks later, he came out with his own little evals framework and everything. And I did everything I could to promote it on LinkedIn and everywhere, tell people about it, right? So, it's not like, we want to just like shut you down and say, no, that's not not for us. It may not be, but it doesn't mean that it's not, a feature that you may have thought belonged there. Doesn't belong in the universe, right?
Yeah. So, Cliff, on that context, if there are developers who want to contribute to MCP Inspector, where do you think they should start? Or, what do you think is the right way for them to contribute so that, their efforts actually get added as part of the MCP Inspector?
First of all, the path that I took is a very valid path. If you're working on something and the MCP Inspector doesn't support some feature of the spec, or the reference server doesn't expose it in a way that you can see how you should implement it or something like that, amend the inspector and the reference server, or add a reference server to show how that worked, and that may go through. But if you're just like, hey, I love this project and I just like to find a corner to get under and lift, like, how can I help? I would say that the first thing is, based upon, your level of understanding of the, protocol so far, if you've been working with it for a while, if you have some experience, A great thing that we would love for you to do is to look through our issues. If you can respond to an issue, I mean, if you can, drop that bit of wisdom that will close that issue and make that person happy, and everybody else who comes following on later who had the same problem and finds the issue and go, oh, here's the answer, right on, I'll keep on trucking, right? That there's so much value in just doing that, right? If you do that and the person comes back and says, yes, that fixed my problem, thank you so much, we will end up coming through there and going, okay, well, thank you so much, and we'll close out that issue, and it's one less issue on the pile, right? And that is the very easiest way to contribute that will have an impact, guaranteed. And there's nothing to get approved and get merged with a helpful answer. I'd love to have everybody just help out in that way. Another way, again, if you have experience and enough with the internals of the inspector or any of the servers or the SDKs, enough to be able to see that some PR that is sitting there is good, bad, or ugly. Put in your 2 cents there. Give it a review. Give it a review. I mean, if you can come in there and say, I think this needs, a fix here, help the person get the PR a little bit closer to being reviewable and mergeable. If it hasn't been looked at yet, is another huge way that doesn't require any approval of anyone for you to put in your 2 cents and help. So, of course, the next level is actually creating a PR. You should learn what a well-formed PR looks like. We get a lot of PRs that, while they do solve a problem, or add a feature or fix a bug and are ultimately good and should be in, have friction associated with them. We have a template when you create a PR, right? You give me the description of your changes, motivation and context, and how has this been tested, and little check boxes for I've done all of this stuff. Pay attention to that. Be clear. We get a lot of PRs that just ignore that. Just all of those are empty, and it's just like I don't know. I'm Chudley B. Coder. Look at my code, dude. It should be clear that it should go in, right? And that is friction to your good work actually getting in. If you take the time to do the work, take the time to, when you create the PR, in your commit message, one of the things I learned working in enterprise in a situation where a line of code that I changed could cause devs all over the world to stop working the very next day, right? Was that review every single line. Put a note in your commit message. In this file, did this in this method, did this in this method. You don't have to put your reasoning there, because there's another place for that. You're going to give, put all that in your commit message, and when you create the PR, it's going to take that and stick it into the description part. If it was a single commit. If you've got a bunch of commits, please go back and make all of the changes, line by line. I did this and that and everything. So before I go over and look at the actual changes in the diffs, I should be able to review the description of, okay, they changed this, 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 and this. Okay, I get an idea of what's happening here. Then I'm at motivation and context. This issue over here, which you're linking to, number 722 or whatever, right? Raised the issue that blah was happening when blah, blah, blah happened. And so it turns out that this is the solution, and, there were options, but I think this is the best one, and so forth, right? So motivation, context, why did you do this? Why is this the implementation you chose? And, be clear about it. In the testing, How was this tested? I tested it against my server. It was fine. Right? I don't have your server. Right? Give me, I recently went through a thing with the inspector, and it was having issues with OAuth and supporting confidential clients versus public clients and so forth. And a change that we had made had caused what appeared to be a regression there and so forth. And this person gave me a whole Python Flask server in his comments in the issue. So I was able to take that and run it locally, run the inspector against it and go, yep, he's right. Doesn't work. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And so I could go in and I could make changes to his server, and, I could go into the inspector. I could make changes. I could say, oh, okay, this will fix it. But now where does this leave me? Do I want to make this change? And I'm going down that road. But having a small world example that proves the problem can get you far. Because one of the hugest stumbling blocks to getting a PR into the inspector is you don't have a publicly referenceable server. I can't test it. I can't reproduce the problem locally. If I get into this PR, I'm going to get your branch on my local machine, and I'm going to bring it up. And I'm, beyond just looking at the diff, I'm going to try to test it. And if I can't reproduce it, then it's really difficult for me to then go ahead and go, well, it looks like it ought to fix the problem they're describing, so let's merge this. It's, so providing some way for the testing. And if you can't, right, then be exhaustive with screenshots and videos in the how was this tested section. Show me, here's my server, and you can see in this part right here that I'm doing blah, blah, blah. Okay, so now I'm running it. I'm connecting the inspector. You can see I put in this, blah, blah, blah. Boom. I get this problem. Okay, this is how it happened. And I can see at least that truly the problem does exist and understand, what's going on, and it gets me a little step closer to maybe I can reproduce it with one of the servers that I have. Maybe I can somehow cobble together a test. All of those bits are the most important thing to getting a PR over the line. Just be complete, be exhaustive, make certain that by the time I get to the diffs, I should already be pretty much convinced that I'm going to merge this. I'm just looking for, you probably ought to, put a little comment in here, or, let's refactor these two things and make it a function, so we're not duplicating ourselves, or, little stuff like that. I want to be convinced of its efficacy before I even get to that diff. And if you can do that, then, that's the kind of person that we're looking for, people who do that as a matter of course and choose important parts of the thing to work on to produce the PRs. I mean, we of course get a number of PRs that are just, I just want to be on the list. Hey, I made a PR. My very first PR was like that. My very first PR was the inspector used to have a little ping button. And, it's all like the Shadsian, layout and everything, white and gray and everything. But the ping button, if you went to that section of it, the ping button had this weird purple kind of, gradient, and you pushed it and then it had this big explosion, something's happened here or whatever like that. And my very first PR was to tone that down just to fix that ping button because it did not belong that way. So that could have been a Me Too PR, right? I got a PR into the MCP, right? And that was, it felt great, but, I quickly moved on to, okay, now I've got a real problem and I need to solve it. And the MCP server or inspector needs to have this functionality. Right? I wasn't looking for any more gimmies. That one just was bugging me, right? And it was the intro that let me see, oh, okay, they're listening. That's the thing. And not just in the inspector, in the SDK. That's the bar to getting things into the SDK is a bit higher. If you are a TypeScript developer and you're also a Kotlin developer or you're also a Java developer or something like that, a great thing for you to do would be to find the disparities and contribute PRs that say, okay, well, over here in the, like the logging thing, right? Here's a feature that is in the TypeScript SDK, really needs to be in the Java SDK. I know Java as well. I'm going to create a PR to add this auto logging thing to the Java SDK. I know it should be there. And I can, all the same applies. Be very thorough, in why you're there and why your PR should be accepted and how you've tested it and all of that stuff. Yeah, that's a big value there.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of areas in which developers can contribute both in the MCP inspector and also different SDKs. They just need to be mindful of being really helpful and being thorough in how they're contributing and explaining to people from their context so that their contributions can be evaluated, critiqued, and then eventually accepted as part of the product and project itself. I'm actually very much looking forward to all things that you are going to improve the MCP inspector for, because it has been a great utility in helping us build really high quality MCP servers, catching bugs early, making sure that we are not shipping a bad quality MCP server into the production. I'm really looking forward to all the good things that you're making to improve the MCP inspector as a great troubleshooting tool. And thank you so much, Cliff. I mean, I've had a pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for sharing your advice. It's been great to have you here.
Thanks for having me on, Ravi. I really appreciate it. And I think this is great. I mean, channels to talk to the community about how to participate are there aren't that many channels, so it's great to have one more. This is awesome. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Thank you for your time, Cliff. Bye. Have a good day.